WHP.
All advice given is for general information purposes. All legal cases are different, and you should seek the advice of your own attorney before acting or making decisions. No attorney-client privilege applies to communications on this show, and no attorney-client relationship is created by calling or writing in. Attorney Rominger practices only in Pennsylvania and maintains his primary office in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Hey, welcome back. 540-0580 is the talk line number. Carl Rominger here answering your legal questions. Just call in. We'll answer them right here on the air. And whatever you want to talk about, divorce, custody, personal injury, DUI, what are your rights? And, of course, at 2 p.m., we're going to have the gun trust lawyer on who's going to answer our questions about how to set up a gun trust, what the purpose of a gun trust is, and answer people's questions on those issues. At least one person said to me, how can you guys do a show on guns given what happened, was it yesterday, I believe? And I said, we can't control the world, and we can't control everything that happens in it. And certainly we have to show respect, and obviously, as a father, my heart goes out to those folks. But I'll maintain that it wasn't guns that caused the problem. It was some mentally deranged criminal who hopefully is rotting in hell at this point. 540-0580 if you want to talk about this or any legal issues. But my point on that just is this. You can't weed out everybody who's crazy. You can't weed out everybody who's going to cause problems. There are people who steer their cars into crowds. There are people who in other countries where there are no guns, attack people with knives and cars and all other sorts of ways because they just are going to act out based on their mental health problems. And that's the real problem. The financial guy that's on before me always tells you, past performance does not guarantee future. Well, sometimes, there's warning signs, but other times people just snap or they have, maybe shown some poor judgment in the past, but nobody thought the guy would ever do this. Although I am always fascinated that we find out, and I'll turn this around for a second, that we find out that a lot of times family or friends are like, I always knew that, old Bob was going to go crazy kind of thing. And what's interesting about that is, here in Pennsylvania, for instance, in order to get somebody institutionalized and checked out, very difficult to do. And, of course, there's a reason for that, which is we don't want to make it very simple simply to have somebody institutionalized and held against their will. But nonetheless, Pennsylvania has one of the most stringent standards around. So even if you have a friend who seems like they could be dangerous or having problems or to themselves or others, very difficult to get them institutionalized in this environment. And they have to be a danger to themselves or others within 30 days to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, which means more often than not, and particularly once the person's remedicated, if they have a history of psychosis or other problems that they take medication for, they'll be right back out on the street. And so, there's no great mechanism for that. On the other hand, in some countries, they have very strong mental health laws, which are regularly abused by the government to lock up their enemies, people unpopular with the state, etc. So again, there's always going to be a balancing test. And unfortunately, in a free society, there's always going to be somebody who takes advantage of that to act out and either hurt somebody or hurt themselves. And so all I can tell you is, we can't change. And I know that there's going to be a national debate now on gun control. There are approximately 300 million guns already in circulation. The mall shooter, I'm told, the other day actually had stolen his guns. So the reality is, unless all the guns are going to be collected and melted down, no amount of proactive gun control going forward is going to prevent people who want to get guns from getting them. And, here in Pennsylvania, we have whole counties. I think of Snyder County, for instance, I believe has, on average, 4 or 5 guns per person there. But they haven't had a single homicide by firearm in that county in how many years? I think I've heard maybe 40 or 50 years. Point being is, it's not the guns that are the problem; it's the people. But that's my editorial for today. 540-0580. Carl Rominger here to answer your questions. Remember, at 2 o'clock we'll have the gun trust lawyer on, so save your gun questions for the 2 o'clock hour. Doug, you're on the air.
Doug?
Yep.
Hey, how are you, Carl?
Good, man.
I've talked to you before. I want to tell you what the Pennsylvania gangsters are up to now, the Department of Environmental Protection.
Yeah, tell me what they're doing.
Well, I used to make biodiesel here as a hobby, and I had a tote, which is one of those 265-gallon plastic containers.
Yeah.
and I had set it in a driveway to protect it from coming in, and the guys were doing damage to the church property next door. Well, short story is the DEP guys drove by and saw it, so they wanted to see whose it was. Well, I told them I was honest up front with it. What is it? It's glycerin. It's not a problem. You put it on your face. You make hand cream out of it, soaps. So, well, then that wasn't good enough for them. I had to spend $60 and have it tested to see if it was flammable, toxic, hazardous, what the pH was. And I don't have that kind of money, but I went ahead and did it. And the whole thing was I didn't trust them from the beginning, and I was adversarial. And I told them, look, I don't trust you guys. No, we're here to help you come up with a plan to dispose of this. Okay, fine. So my plan was I wanted to put it down as a defoliant. There's some literature on the internet that says you can do that. Mm-hmm. Or you can put it as a compost agent, because if it's not hazardous, and the guy told me, I'm here to help. Let's get this test done. If it comes back, no problems, let's go ahead with your plan. Okay, my plan was to put it down as a compost agent, because I had really high grass this year, and I needed to change the pH of my ground anyway. It was basic. I needed anyway. Too much lime. I had to put some acid in. It worked fine. Short story is, 2 weeks after I told him that, they came and looked at it and said, well, there's really no damage here. There's no problems. A week after that, I get what they call a CAP.
Okay.
You familiar with that?
I've heard the term, but for the listeners.
Okay, to avoid litigation, they're fining me $2,040 in civil penalties. That's civil action penalty, CAP.
Right. And what are they saying they're going to do to you if you don't agree to pay that?
Well, then I have to go to litigation, and then I have to bring my expert witnesses, hire. Well, I don't necessarily have an attorney. I can go pro se, but I need to come up with the science, because they're going to bring their scientists. They're going to bring their attorneys. They're going to bring all this. So I talked with them. I said, this is crazy. I did it on my own property. I did it according to what you guys said, if I had a plan to go ahead with it. And they said, well, you didn't get a permit. So the two things out of the whole thing was I didn't get a permit to dispose of this, and secondly, I disposed of it without a proper plan. Well, okay, let's go retro. Give me a permit. Well, I can't issue you a permit for disposal of glycerin because we don't have any. So I'm getting charged for not having that, and I'm getting charged because I didn't follow their rules. But they brought it down to $1,000 immediately because there was no willful intent. Right. I worked with them for 3 months. It wasn't like I damaged somebody else's property. So they have this matrix where they decide what it was. $1,000. They're going to let me have payments of $166 a month for 6 months. But I just want to warn everybody out there. I can't beat them, Carl. I can't come in with the science and an expert witness and an attorney and do all this for $1,000. And they know that.
And all it is what, glycerin?
Yeah, glycerin. A waste. Now, I don't even want to say waste. I want to say a byproduct of biodiesel. You can sell it. They sell it to make hand soaps out of it. It's a degreaser. It's completely benign as long as the methanol is extracted from it. Mine was perfect. I had it lab tested. It was perfect. Beautiful stuff. But when they said go ahead with the plan, as soon as you get a plan and it's non-toxic, non-hazardous, not going to cause a problem, we're going to go with it. I went with it. 2 weeks later, they come back and said, well, you didn't get a permit from us. We didn't approve this. Right. I said, you had a plan. You told me if I had a plan. Well, apparently I didn't have their plan. Now,
did you ever actually put it down, or is it still in a tub?
Oh, no. I composted. I had 6-foot-high ryegrass that we had put in for a cover crop so that we could mulch it down and make a good composting area for next year's crop. Yeah. And I put this on a good hot sunny day, and I sprayed it and atomized it so that it was completely atomized little molecules so that the sun degraded it, because that's what kills this stuff, is biodegradable with the sun. I left it go for 2 weeks. I mulched it down with a good mower. I left it go for another 2 days, and then I disked it under, and it was perfect. They came over and looked at it. There was no puddles of this. There was no runoff. There was nothing. Right. There was a problem. The problem was I didn't get a permit to do it.
But they're also now telling you couldn't have gotten a permit. There would be no permit for it.
There's no permit to get it. So therefore, they wanted me to have it hauled at my expense to a hazardous or non-hazardous facility to get rid of this stuff, which is crazy.
Doug, this is what I'll tell you. Environmental laws tend to be strict liability, so your mindset isn't really even important to the guilt or innocence under the environmental code. The ones that are civil, are also then remedial in nature and therefore broadly construed, even though they have civil penalties.
Exactly. Very ambiguous, which falls back on the writer.
They should, but they're broadly construed to effectuate the environmental concerns, the courts will say. I mean, look, the Supreme Court of the United States even told the EPA that they can treat CO2 as a pollutant now, right?
Oh, my God.
So that's where we're headed. But, yeah, I think your story's a good one. I actually had a client who, you'll appreciate this, Dan. I'm going to tell you really quick, and then I got to go to break. I had a client who had a lot of car batteries, and they were stacked up outside, and the DEP guy comes along and says, I need you to store your batteries differently. And the client scratched his head and looked at the regulations for a while and pronounced to the DEP guy, well, actually, there are no regulations for the outdoor storage of batteries. You've got all kinds of stuff for the indoor storage.
Mm-hmm.
And the DEP guy looks at him and goes, yeah, you're right. So how about we just work something out?
Exactly. And then they're sending me this letter before they charge me officially. If you want to avoid litigation, let's do this. So now I got to pay $1,000 that I don't have. And they know that, but they know that I can't come up with expert witnesses to produce science.
It will cost you more to defend that case.
Sure, and they know. That's why I'm calling them Pennsylvania gangsters. Yeah. And they are. They're just absolutely gangsters.
Well, but they saved the environment now, so,
Yeah, my ground, my environment, my problem. All right, buddy, thanks.
All right, man, take care.
Pass that on for everybody else that's listening. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
540-0580. See you after the break. Welcome back. Carl Rominger here answering your legal questions. 540-0580. Whatever you want to talk about. John, you're on the air.
Yeah. You're talking about, incarcerating people or locking them up for mental illness in Pennsylvania, and it's really not practical. But Pennsylvania can forcibly take you out of your home and say that you're incapable of taking care of yourself and force you into a nursing home and do that in perpetuity with very little problem. There's an article about this couple they did this to in, I believe it's East Petersburg, in the Lancaster paper today, another article, and they pulled an 89-year-old woman and a 92-year-old guy out of a home of 48 years and had them forcibly removed, even though originally the son of this couple said he would move in with his wife, who is a licensed nurse.
Right.
And the state said no. And this is in, the county, this is being mentioned in the Lancaster paper again. And if they can do this, how can they get away with it? I mean, they determine by some expert or something you're incapable of taking care of yourself and have to be incarcerated in a nursing home in perpetuity.
Well, what ends up happening there, the standard is the Department of Aging or other county services, whoever gets involved, petitions the court for a guardianship.
Right.
And
some judge got paid off or bribed to do this for some reason.
Or
I don't know what.
Or the doctor gave testimony and said these people are not capable of taking care of themselves.
That's right. And it's all based on some tip that they won't mention who gave the tip or if the person has a financial interest in trying to take this home. Remember, in the state, we had a judge locking up people because he was going to get kickback for sending kids to a home that he was getting.
Yeah, actually two judges. Actually two judges up there in Scranton.
Right. And, so things like this happen. And something like this, I mean, when the guy's kid and his wife, who's a nurse, say that they are going to move in with them to solve the problem, and the state says that's not good enough, this is really, really troubling.
Now, of course, the question is, did these people, they would have gotten a court-appointed lawyer if they hadn't been able to afford one or asked for one, so we don't know if they proceeded with counsel either or not.
I don't know how much counsel they had or how much money they had to spend, but, supposedly they lived in this home for 48 years. I don't know I don't know these people, never met them, but the story aggravates me that somebody can be essentially institutionalized in perpetuity simply by saying the Department of Aging got people to say you could do this. You're saying you can't get mentally ill people to do this, But if I say you're too old and you can't take care of yourself, I can do this in perpetuity.
Right.
And that's what because it never, under this statute, you can never become capable of taking care of yourself again. Right?
Well, that's the theory. Now, you can become, I mean, you can get unguardianed at some point, but very unlikely.
Right. And essentially, the state saying and I was reading the story, there's several, comments and, stories about this, and the Lancaster County Commissioner mentioned this, and this thing sounds really, really bad. I mean, there is something, especially when the guy's kid said they will move in with him, that force somebody out of their home.
Oh, yeah, no, it's interesting. So I'm going to take a look at that article because I just found it online. And in the meantime, take some more questions, but I may weigh back in on it, okay?
Yeah, I just want to say that there's something, it smells funny.
Well,
is the best way to put it.
We'll see what happens. Follow it because it looks like there's going to be some more on it. All right, my friend.
All right, bye.
540-0580, Carl Rominger answering your legal questions. Ken, you want to talk about HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability Act?
Yes, well, I think it's under that.
Privacy and Portability Act.
Yeah, I got hospitalized 6 weeks ago, and it was confidential, and my general manager went out and told somebody why I was in there. It wasn't under the normal circumstances. What do I do about that?
So, give me the skinny on this again.
I was put in the hospital.
Okay, you put in the hospital,
and I went into a special unit in there. And he coaxed me into telling him after I was in there for a week, what it was about. He said the company needed to know, and I kept telling him it was personal, and finally I just said, hey, I went in for depression. Right. Well, he went to a neighbor of our office and told somebody that's why I was in the hospital.
That's interesting. HIPAA itself covers covered entities, okay? And it's not clear necessarily that your employer is a covered entity or not under HIPAA because they're not in the business of providing health care. On the other hand, they are in the business of keeping employee files, which may from time to time contain medical data, and they shouldn't be sharing that. So at the very least, it's still an invasion of your privacy for them to share that with a third person, if not a HIPAA violation. Interestingly, a HIPAA violation doesn't matter to you because that's just something that the government can pursue. There's no private right of action under HIPAA, but invasion of privacy, putting publicity on a secluded life where it's unjustified is actionable.
Yeah, I'm pretty upset about it.
Has any harm flowed from it?
No, other than the other night I was in the office late and he came out and he wanted more details on why I was in and stuff, and I just told him no. I'm not discussing that.
Right. No, that's now. On the other hand, the employer can say, "Well, we want to try to accommodate you for work, and if you don't explain your medical condition to us, then we can't accommodate you." And I understand that the employer would have the right to know that, and if you don't want to tell them, you don't have to. But then they could say, "Well, we can't accommodate you because we don't know what's wrong with you, so we're just going to fire you. Now you can't get unemployment." But they shouldn't be telling third parties anything about that communication.
Yeah, I can't get unemployment in my business anyhow, but. I'm upset about going to a third party and telling them what was going on, and I just wonder if I have any grounds to address it.
Right. Well, I mean, you certainly have the right to have a lawyer write a letter to the employer, etc. But I guess what I'm trying to say, I mean, you want to keep working there?
I'm going to retire probably in February.
Okay.
And go do something else.
Yeah, so it might be worth your while just to hold on to it for a little while and then raise the issue after you're safely out of the door, so to speak.
Okay.
All right.
And I am a client of yours for a couple of years. So
come see me when you're ready.
Okay.
And thanks for being a client.
Hey, thank you for your help.
No problem, man. Take care.
All right. Bye.
540-058. I can't tell you that, right? I can't agree. But he said it, so it's okay. I just couldn't say anything until he said it. Teresa, you're on the air.
Hi, Carl. I'm actually just had a little comment and a question because I have a son with mental health issues. But that one thing we're not looking at right now is we're not looking about what happened to our mental health funding. If you look back, I think that the Columbine shooting started in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know that in '06 is when they all started cutting back? Everybody's cut back on mental health funding. And if we all look back, look how many school shootings and look how many mental health issues that we've had. I think if we bring our parents and our schools a little bit more informed on advocacy for mental health, get a little more mental health training in there, especially with our police officers, I think we might see a great difference.
You know, it's interesting you say that. So I'll tell you something very interesting. So way back years ago, Pennsylvania used to house something like 50,000 people in psychiatric institutions around the state. And there was an argument that a lot of those people didn't need to be there, obviously, and a lot didn't, and some did. And they were just really more like warehouses for the mentally ill than they were treatment centers, okay? But over the years, when they defunded the state hospital system, the prison population exploded, and now magically Pennsylvania's prison population looks roughly like the same number of people who were in mental health institutions previously. And there is a huge crossover between criminal behavior and mental health problems. And I think you're absolutely right. What you're identifying is by cutting back on the services that are available and the bed space and the things that we need for intervention, these more people run out of control or spiral out of control who could have been, caught earlier in their cycle and perhaps, institutionalized or at least brought some intensive services into. So I can think of a few of my clients I've dealt with over the years who, when they're taking their medication, literally, are role model citizens, but periodically they will just decide that they've been good in taking their meds for 5 years and therefore there must be nothing wrong with them anymore. Or they have a triggering event, or their insurance gets canceled, or, like you said, the charity that was providing something is no longer able to help them with it. And then they either turn to self-medication, which is quite often alcohol or street drugs, or they end up spiraling out of control completely. And I just had one fellow in my office the other day who I like a lot, but I said to him, you need to get into an institution immediately because you are on the verge of going off the cliff. And I could tell, you know?
But that's, and if you notice, in '06 is when we've seen all the school shootings started, and that's when the mental health funding was cut back.
Right. So what you're saying is when we really stopped spending a lot of money on and it's simple stuff. It's like I have clients right now, and we'll just talk about drugs and alcohol. Let's just turn away from strict mental health for a second, looking for bed space. And the available funds for bed space are much lower than they were before. Therefore, the amount of help. So you have people who do want to get help or get into, say, a drug rehab or an alcohol rehab, but there's no funds for it. They don't have funds for it. The system doesn't have funds for it. So they're left out there doing the drugs. And, of course, when they're doing street drugs especially, they've got to pay for them. In order to pay for them, quite often people do things that they would later regret, right?
Right.
And so it's all around. But I agree. That's interesting. And be curious to see if you can correlate the two of those directly. You know, you need the guys from Freakonomics or something like that to do a regression study.
Yeah, very interesting. I wanted to bring it up as advocacy because that's something we all forget about. I do have a special needs son, and you know my son.
Mm-hmm.
You like to go eat where he cooks, so I think you know who I am.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, well, all these problems I'm starting to see is all the funding being cut back. You know what the waiting list to get into one of these places for help is? It's 1 year. Yeah, I mean, that's the issue. That's the issue, that there's just nothing available. Now, the flip side is I'm not a big guy that government has to pay for everything, but what you're suggesting is the true cost of providing these services on the front end is lower than the true cost, both in terms of dollars, criminal institutions, and loss of life on the back end. Correct. And did you know that our police officers only get 20 hours of training for mental health? Yeah, and given the fact that I got to go to break here in a second, but I had dinner with a police officer last night who said, my favorite thing to say is I'm not a social worker. But what he meant by that is that a lot of the calls they get and a lot of things that people are looking for really aren't police intervention in the strictest sense so much as they're looking for a life coach or a social worker to try to set their domestic situation right or give us some advice on who should move out of the apartment first. And I thought that was interesting because what you're saying is right, that they're not trained for that. That's not what they're supposed to go out and do necessarily. But then again, if they have additional training, maybe they can fill that role on a case-by-case basis where necessary. Correct. All right, my friend. I got to go to break. Shout out there. I know you got to go to break. Just let me shout out. I got myself informed by going to a group called NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness. Uh-huh. They sent me through a 16-week course, got certified as a mental health teacher, and it taught me how to become an advocate for my son. It taught me to learn the warning signs before he acted out. It taught me this. It taught me that. I'd just like to tell anybody who's listening with mental health, watch for them trigger signs. Watch for them issues. It could be something little. Watch for them. They might be grabbing your medicine out of your medicine cabinet, but really, parents, please get yourself informed. It's NAMI.org. Go to their website. Get yourself informed.
All right.
Watch out.
Got to go to break. Thanks. You got it, NAMI. Carl Rominger here, 540-0580. Dan, you're back on the air.
Hey, I just wanted to make a comment about what the last lady said.
Yeah.
I don't think that was very scientific, her correlation between the decrease in spending on the mental health care and, all these incidents. I mean, there is a actual medical correlation between some of these things that happen. For example, in Columbine, both of the shooters were on Ritalin, the drugs that we've been drugging our young men with for, the last 25 years, because we don't want boys to be boys anymore. We don't want them to be rambunctious or high energy, so we started drugging them. And I don't think we'll ever find out the true reason that this disturbed young man shot up all the classroom, his parents and everything else. But I would love to know. We're going to find out what type of weapon it was, what caliber of the bullet, and everything else. But I'd like to know if this young man, they said he has a history of mental illness, what drugs he was on. So we can start putting this thing together to see, if that is a problem, the fact that we're drugging our young men from an early age because they're acting like boys.
Well, that's the theory of regression analysis is you can start looking at different data points and see if it makes a difference in how things turn out. So if you read the book Freakonomics, that's why I brought that up. I think I was trying to say it to her is I'm not certain I know what the science on this is. On the other hand, what she's talking about in terms of a correlation could be very rapid onset because she's not just saying these are people raised in a certain way over the course of their lifetime. What she's saying is the ability for intervention when crises start to blow up. And so I do know this from my practice. There are people who start to spiral out of control with their mental health, but if they're kicked back in line, quite often don't end up in as bad a shape as they would if there's no one to intervene. So now let's come back to your point, though. What you're saying is what's the long-term effect of all these different drugs? Now, we know
certainly you should read the instructions on those, the side effects.
Yeah, the black box warnings and
they're horrible. And we have in situations, I have experience with this. My one kid had speech therapy problems because he had a lot of ear infections as a kid. So we took him for speech therapy, and right away the IU-13 lady decided that he should be on Ritalin because he didn't make good eye contact. And I said, absolutely not. He went there for a year, and after the year was up, she said, you know what, you're right in not doing that. He just didn't trust her because he didn't know her. But they immediately, this person with no medical background wanted to put him on a potent drug that is absolutely locked people up for selling this drug on the private market, and yet we're just handing this to kids, sending them to the school with these drugs. In some cases, the kids don't take the drugs, and then they sell them to their friends.
Yeah, no, and I that's what I'm saying. So sorting out where all this comes from, and quite frankly, the fact, and I go back to this, I mentioned it earlier, you have areas of Pennsylvania, you have other areas of the country where there are phenomenally large numbers of guns and families and children in schools, and you don't see any gun violence amongst the adults. You don't see any gun violence amongst the kids. You definitely don't see any gun violence amongst the young children. Other areas of the country, particularly some urban areas, you have high murder rates amongst the youth. You have a large legal use of guns amongst the population. So there's also a lot of cultural differences in the different areas of the country.
I'm with you, Carl. It's not the gun, but it's the nut that's pulling the trigger. So maybe we ought to find out why the nut's pulling the trigger before we pull back on the gun and say, because hey, if this nut's pulling a trigger, and I'm across the room and I have a gun to defend myself and the other 20-some people in that room, wouldn't you rather have me as an armed former Marine in the room that knows how to handle the weapon to maybe dispatch the whole situation quickly?
Interestingly, The Atlantic monthly magazine, which isn't known for being the bastion of conservatism. It's actually quite often beat up by conservatives. I find it to be a very good read. And one of the articles that they just had in the latest issue was basically saying there's no rational reason to restrict concealed carry permits in America, and that, in fact, it probably does make things safer because you have to start from the premise that the bad people, and this was great, we'll just start from the premise that there are enough guns in circulation that the bad people will always be able to get a hold of them, or the crazy people will always be able to get a hold of them if they truly want. So then they looked at a couple states where concealed carry permits have been added recently, and the crime rates, the gun violence rates, do not go up in those states whatsoever. And,
Carl, what's funny? They're going to tell us at some point that they're going to be able to round up these 300 million some guns in our society, and yet they tell us we can't deport 150 million legal aliens.
What they can't do is keep $100 billion worth of illegal drugs from flowing into the country every year either.
But we can get rid of all those guns by asking law-abiding citizens to hand them back in. And the criminals certainly going to hand his back in as well, right?
RJ probably has a pound of marijuana hidden in this studio somewhere, and they're never going to get that.
I'll be there in a little while. Just kidding. I have no interest.
All right, my friend.
Have a good one.
All right. 540-0580. Claire.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rominger.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Very good.
I'm calling because I found a situation that I thought was odd. Mm-hmm. I have a friend. She's a mother of several teenage sons, and the 17-year-old, she told me, had gotten a citation from a Harrisburg policeman about 2 months ago on a Sunday. And he had given him a citation because he was riding his bicycle the wrong way up a street in Harrisburg.
Okay.
And I thought that was unusual. So now this 17-year-old also separately had gotten in trouble for drinking alcohol with a friend, so he was under the supervision of juvenile probation. And when this matter finally came before district justice, I heard the policeman say, well, I had given him a ticket except that he smart-mouthed me, so I gave him the ticket. And I thought that was an unreasonable basis to give a ticket out.
Well,
he also indicated that the kid, when he was riding the wrong way up the street, had a small cigar in his mouth, and I think he momentarily thought it was something...
A blunt, as we would call it.
And I think he flagged him down because he thought it was a blunt, discovered it was nothing but an ordinary cigar. But, sometimes a banana is a banana. And I think to cover himself for that moment of embarrassment, gave the kids the ticket.
Well, and it quite frankly, and here's the problem. If he has reasonable suspicion or probable cause to stop him, and on a bicycle it's reasonable suspicion because it's not a motor vehicle, but it's a vehicle on a highway, he's going the wrong way, he can stop him. It can be a pretext if he wants to check it out. And then quite frequently, that's my joke is when somebody calls about a speeding ticket, I always say, now, did you tell the police officer they should be out busting crack dealers instead of pulling over speeders? Because the attitude with which you treat the police officer, he has absolute discretion whether to issue that summary citation or not. So while we would prefer that police officers realize that they're occasionally going to get some guff and just let it go, when they're trying to sort of give you a break by not ticketing you, I guess, if you want to stick your head in the throat of the lion and yell at it, you're free to do that. So my point on this is just to say, you're right, it's not the best of all circumstances. It sounds like a pretext stop. But if he was going the wrong way up a one-way, it's technically a violation.
Well, while that experience was going on, another police car happened to be in the area and rolled up and sort of stayed there while this went on. And two more people went by the policeman while he was writing the citation, riding the wrong way. And the person that he had stopped riding the wrong way was African American. Two whites went by. He didn't attempt to get them or to slow them down for what they were doing. and that left an uncomfortability.
Yeah, well, I feel that. I got to go to break. Shane's yelling at me. I missed the last break already. All right, thank you. Take care, Claire. I got your point. Welcome back. Carl Rominger here, 540-0580. Scott, you're on the air.
Hey, Carl. How you doing today?
Good.
Hey, my wife's Facebook friends with you. You guys battle a lot back and forth, and I got a couple of issues I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
First off, yesterday on Bob Durgan's show, they were talking about this horrible shooting, and a couple of people called in about banning high caliber assault rifle, high capacity assault rifles. And I think a lot of people are so misinformed, and that's the problem with this gun thing, to blame the gun. I have two AR-15s, one's a 22 and one's a 223, which are two of the smaller caliber bullets manufactured. They go after the gun instead of the criminal. And with respect to that and the open carry law in Pennsylvania, I've heard a lot of different things about the open carry law. Can you give me a little bit of ground on it? Is it actually an open carry law to where you are allowed to carry a handgun openly without a concealed permit?
Yeah, Pennsylvania has no restrictions on the open carry of any kind of firearm as long as it's visible. It's only the concealed carry or carrying it loaded in the vehicle that requires the permit.
Okay. All right, now the second thing, my daughter's in high school in Big Spring out in Newville, and I've been concerned since the last 4 school shootings about taking her out of bed in school, and I tried to decide what the options are. Is there a way that a citizen like myself or a dad could approach the state about a program like a school marshal program that would be similar to the air marshal program that might consist of volunteers or military? The thing I always go back to in this scenario is that we have so many thousands of people in this country that are already sworn by oath to defend the Constitution and the citizens. And a school marshal, one of the things that scares me is that all these things happen and these people get to the front door of the school. And it seems to me that a school marshal program that's made up of parents and people that are qualified and capable of handling a firearm could stop that person from getting to the school without essentially imprisoning the students. And is there a place that you could go to try to start a program like that statewide as opposed to on a federal level?
Well, I mean, yeah, the government of the state would have to approve it and do it. And, of course, you can imagine how controversial it's going to be and problematic. I mean, there's a long time ago they said, how about training school teachers to carry handguns? I mean, why not just take 4, 5, or 7 teachers at every school and train them on the use of a gun, or better yet, certify every teacher at every school, but then only designate at any given point 5 of them to carry a firearm. Just nobody knows which 5 are actually, going to have a gun somewhere locked up in the classroom.
Well, and the only problem I have with that, and you've discussed this before, if they get to your front door, it's a little bit late. And it seems to me like in all of these school shootings that the entrances of the school property were in some way protected or patrolled. As an example, going back to the military, a lot of guys that have served in Afghanistan, they're trained on how to use the firearm, but they're also trained mentally on how to detect the threat. And without creating essentially a police state at the school, it seems like we could have an environment that there would be a few hours of the shift per person that can provide security. I think once they get to the door, it's too late, because if you kill one principal getting into the school to find that armed teacher, I think the damage is already done. So how would you go about preventing them from getting into the building? That's my concern.
Right.
All right, I was curious about that. Thank you, Carl.
All right, brother, take care.
Have a great day.
540-0580. Bobby, you're on the air. Bobby.
Hello. My question is there anything I can do about water that's coming into my cellar from my neighbor's yard? It's coming under the ground of the road in front of me, and it's washing away a neighbor's yard and mine.
Potentially something you could do. It would depend on whether or not it's been created by the neighbors doing something to cause the land to act like that. Or
no,
not.
It springs under the water.
Yes.
A man that lived there before had it all the springs in one place, and they went down a pipe. But when this man moved, he moved the ground and took away that pipe. And so all the water dispersed under the ground, and it's coming into my basement now.
Interesting. So they did change something about the land that then caused it.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe give you your in. In Pennsylvania, water's the common enemy, which means everybody's got to deal with it themselves, and as long as they don't artificially channel it onto somebody else's property. So the first thing we would do is usually get an engineer out there.
Okay.
Because if we're going to have a lawsuit, we've got to have an expert. So we get the expert out there first and have them tell us and say, okay, here's where it's coming from. Here's what you would need to do to fix it. And here's why the other guy's responsible or not responsible.
Okay.
And that kills 3 birds with 1 stone, because you find out if you have a lawsuit or not. You find out why it's happening. And more importantly, you find out what you need to do to stop it.
Okay. I was afraid I'd have to build another wall outside. And I didn't know what that was going to cost.
And I don't know if that would be necessary or not. That's where the consulting engineer comes in and says, all right, here's how we handle these things.
Okay.
I mean, maybe they just need to dig some kind of French drain that pulls it off. Maybe they just need to, maybe they're going to tell you just have to put a sump pump in. I don't know. I'm not the engineer. I'm just the guy that says the law talk stuff.
Do you have any idea how much they cost?
I think you're going to end up spending around $400 or $500 just to get your situation figured out, if I had to guess. But it's cheaper than going to court right off the bat.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah, thanks a million.
All right, take care. If you need any help locating an engineer, you can call us off the air. It's 241-6070 is the office number.
241?
6070. And just let the girls know you talked to me on the radio and that I was going to help you get the name of an engineer.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
540-0580. Mac, you're on the air.
Hi, Carl. Thanks for taking my call.
No problem.
Some paperwork in the mail last week from my daughter that says it's a police criminal complaint.
Okay.
Something that happened back in May, like the end of May, beginning of June of this year. And amongst all the paperwork is something that says she has to be fingerprinted. So I'm assuming she's being arrested?
She's being summoned, which is the functional equivalent of an arrest, yes.
Okay, and they want her to be fingerprinted at a cost of $125.
Yes, unfortunately, and in Pennsylvania, you must be fingerprinted as part of an arrest.
Okay, so is that something that an attorney has to be with her for?
No, but Mac, I want you to hold on here for a minute. I'm going to talk to you off the air during the break.
All right, thanks.
All right, guys, when we come back, we're going to have the gun trust lawyer with us, and he's going to talk, David Gold, gun trust lawyer. He's going to talk to us about gun trusts, and, of course, we'll keep taking all your legal questions, but especially your gun questions. See you in a little bit. Go to Rominger Law, www.romingerlaw.com in the meantime to check us out.